Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Claire. I'm a contract librarian on assignment here with NOAA Central Library, and I'll be your host this afternoon. This seminar series is offered through the NOAA Central Library Seminar Program, which provides an educational forum for the presentation of ideas, research updates, and news in support of NOAA's mission. Before we start, I have a few technical tips for attendees. Just so you're aware, you are muted and you are not able to unmute. However, if you have a question, you can type it into the question or chat panel, and we will get to those during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have any audio or visual issues, if you can't hear the speakers or see the slides, please try logging off and logging back on, and that will solve most issues in GoToWebinar. As a reminder, this is being recorded. If you'd like to revisit this seminar or view previous seminars, you can find them on our YouTube channel. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lauren.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Wenzel. I'm the director of the National Marine Protected Areas Center at the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries at NOAA. And I am excited to be sharing with you today the Sanctuaries Climate Resilience Plan that a team of us have worked on. And with me today is Carol Bernthal. Carol, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Carol Bernthal. I'm the Sanctuary Superintendent for Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary in Washington State.
Great. Thanks, Carol. So we're going to go ahead and start the presentation, and then we will be back to answer any questions at the end. So I'm going to turn off my camera while I give the presentation, but we'll be back. Thanks. So first, I think the question is, why did we decide to do a climate resilience plan? And the simple answer is that climate impacts are increasingly affecting our oceans and, of course, our sanctuaries within them. And we recognized that we needed to set measurable and meaningful goals, and we needed to take action on climate now. That doesn't mean that we hadn't been working on climate issues, but we really saw a need to ramp up our efforts. And we also saw an opportunity because the Sanctuaries Office is planning for a new strategic plan that will start in 2023. And so we wanted to provide a bridge to that time period and think about what we could do now and really ramp up our efforts and be prepared for the next strategic plan. And of course, addressing climate change is essential to achieving our vision and mission. Our vision is a thriving sanctuary system that protects our nation's underwater treasures and inspires momentum for a healthy ocean. And our mission is to protect treasured places in the ocean and Great Lakes. And we can't do that without addressing climate change. And of course, we know that climate is an administration priority. The US has now committed to greenhouse gas reductions and has rejoined the Paris Agreement. In addition to that, the president held a virtual White House Climate Summit on Earth Day this year and announced ambitious new commitments to curb US greenhouse gas emissions to at least 50% below 2005 by the end of this decade. He also issued an executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad with a broad suite of issues. So we really see ourselves as fitting into a broader interagency push on climate issues. The system is very diverse, so a lot of challenges in terms of looking at climate impacts on a wide range of ecosystems, spanning from American Samoa to Stellwagen Bank off the coast of Cape Cod, and encompassing more than 600,000 square miles of marine and Great Lakes waters. So the system includes 15 national marine sanctuaries and 2 marine national monuments, Papahanaumokuakea in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands and Rose Atoll in American Samoa. And just last week, we welcomed a new sanctuary to the sanctuary family, the Wisconsin Shipwreck Coast in Lake Michigan. So it's exciting to see the sanctuary system growing as well. How is climate change affecting sanctuaries? The short answer is in a lot of ways. As I mentioned, the sanctuaries are diverse, and so they have diverse impacts. But some of the impacts that we're seeing are rising water temperatures and sea levels. The water is becoming more acidic and containing less oxygen. We're seeing shifting species and altered weather patterns and storms. And all of that impacts the sanctuary resources that we are charged with managing with our partners. And so one of the ways in which we have tried to better understand climate impacts to sanctuaries has been to develop climate change impact profiles for each sanctuary. So these are a series of short documents that describe the climate impacts at each sanctuary, including case studies on affected resources and general trends. They include scientific citations, but they're written for a general audience, including advisory council members and partners. So we're really hoping that these can help us engage with the public as we start to talk about specific vulnerabilities and adaptation options. And all of these are posted on our website. So the plan itself contains guiding principles, goals, strategies, and actions, and resources, staffing, and partnerships. And you'll see that it is for a relatively short period of time, 21 through 23. And we're thinking of it as a living document that will really position us to think about the following 5-year period starting in FY24. I should also note that we include strategies which are not SMART objectives, but the actions are time-bound and specific. So these are some of the guiding principles that we thought about when we put this together. You already heard that we've realized that addressing climate change is essential to achieving the sanctuary's mission. Another guiding principle is to integrate and accelerate, meaning that we need to integrate actions throughout all of our work and accelerate our efforts. The next guiding principle is about partnerships. We know we need to develop strong partnerships with other NOAA offices and external partners to build our climate science, education and outreach, and management capabilities. We realize that being effective managers requires us to be more effective and visible in our climate communication and outreach to build public understanding and support. And Sanctuaries has very strong communication efforts. So we see that as a real opportunity for us to build on those visual storytelling that we do through video and photographs, 360-degree videos, in order to tell the climate story of what we're seeing in our sanctuaries and how we're responding. Another principle is around equity, diversity, and inclusion. We see climate as an opportunity to engage new constituencies and address environmental justice issues, as well as to work with national and international partners to facilitate climate solutions beyond our boundaries. That's one thing about managing a place that's relatively small relative to climate impacts, that we need to be thinking at a seascape scale and working with other partners on actions that we can take. We also think that as climate requires us to be adaptive, it really draws on the creative, flexible, and adaptive culture that we're trying to cultivate in our office and help us apply practical science-based solutions to climate impacts. And lastly, we just wanted to acknowledge that people have been working on climate issues for a long time, and none of this is meant to imply that we haven't been working hard on this, but just that the impacts that we're seeing and the rapid rate of change requires us to step up our efforts. So I'm going to walk through the 4 goals in our climate plan and briefly summarize the goals, outcomes, and a few example strategies for each one. So the first goal is to assess the current and predicted climate impacts to sanctuary resources. And the outcome is that the sanctuary staff and partners would have a common understanding of current and predicted impacts to inform our management. And so, as I mentioned, under each goal, we have strategies and actions. I'm not going to walk through all of those, but I'm going to share a couple of strategies so you get an idea of the types of approaches that we're planning to take. So under goal 1, which really focuses more on the science, we want to increase our collaboration with other NOAA offices to address climate priorities and to complete vulnerability assessments for all sites as a foundation for adaptation strategies. Goal 2 is to identify and implement climate adaptation and mitigation strategies for sanctuaries. And here, our outcome would be that sanctuary staff and partners are actively pursuing climate adaptation and mitigation strategies in sanctuaries and monuments. I think many protected area programs have found that it's easier to study the problem than to try to get their arms around adaptation actions in terms of how to respond, but we're really getting to that point where we really need to start integrating climate into our sanctuary management. And that doesn't only mean addressing climate impacts, but also non-climate impacts that may weaken the ability of the ecosystem to be resilient to climate threats. So here, for example, you see a picture of a sanctuary staff removing crown of thorns sea stars in the National Marine Sanctuary of American Samoa, which prey on coral reefs to enhance the resilience of the coral reef ecosystem as we see more climate impacts. So some of the strategies under Goal 2 are to identify adaptation strategies with sanctuary stakeholders and regional partners, to engage diverse perspectives, pool knowledge, and leverage resources, and to identify priorities for habitat restoration for climate resilience. And here we're really seeing a growing focus on habitat restoration. One of our largest efforts is in the Florida Keys, the Mission Iconic Reefs effort to replant several reefs and reestablish healthy reefs in order to help sustain broader coral health in the region in the face of coral disease and other impacts. Goal 3 is to advance ocean and climate literacy through sanctuaries. So the outcome we're looking for here is that NOAA staff, partners, and volunteers are effectively communicating about climate impacts and resilience within and beyond sanctuary boundaries. And here we have a lesson plan teaching folks about ocean acidification and what the impacts are on shell-building organisms. So some of the strategies here are to develop and deliver messages about how climate change is impacting sanctuaries and how sanctuaries can be part of the solution to lessen or mitigate climate change impacts, and to assess and leverage existing education programs so that we can emphasize climate literacy. And then the fourth and last goal is to implement actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from sanctuary facilities and operations. So here we're really talking about walking the talk and making sure that our own operations are demonstrating the kinds of actions that we would like to see and support in our communities. And the outcome would be decreased ONMS greenhouse gas emissions with a long-term goal of reaching carbon neutrality. And the picture here is of the Ocean Exploration Center in Santa Cruz for the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And this is a LEED gold building, so it has a lot of energy conserving features. And that is just one example of the types of energy conservation efforts that we are looking at across our program. And so some of the strategies here are to establish a baseline for our carbon emissions, to monitor and evaluate our greenhouse gas emissions and mitigation efforts, consider our operations carbon footprint, and develop strategies and dedicate resources to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this can include things like installing solar panels in Florida Keys at the Eco Discovery Center, where you see the display panel here, but also things like reevaluating our travel policies and thinking about what we've learned during this year of full-time telework and how we can reduce the carbon footprint associated with our vehicles, our small boats, and other parts of our operations. And then the last section of the plan talks about the budget and implementation. So we are looking at potential climate initiatives in 22 and 23 through the president's budget, depending on the congressional action that is finally taken, but really encouraging all of the units across our office to think about their climate needs during budget planning, thinking about what they can do under a flat budget scenario, and also if there are increased resources available. We are also revamping the ONMS climate team. This is a team that has been established for several years, but we are reorganizing it to fully support this plan. So it'll be very action oriented and helping us make progress on the actions that we've identified. And then we are looking at expanding our partnerships and have developed an internal Google site to provide some practical guidance to staff on how to do some of these actions. All right, so now I'm very happy to turn it over to Carol to give you a case study from Olympic Coast.
Okay, well, good morning again. I'm Carol Bernthal, Sanctuary Superintendent at Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary in the northwestern corner of Washington State. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our current efforts around integrating climate into sanctuary management for this particular area. You could go to the next slide. So as Lauren mentioned, climate has been, it's not a new topic, but it is emerging as kind of the major stressor for multiple agencies, and in our case, coastal tribes. So in Washington State, we have 26 federally recognized tribes. On the coast of the area that I am the superintendent for, we have 4 coastal tribes who have treaty rights, and so they are bound in place. So they are very affected by any kind of major stresses like climate change, and it affects both their communities and their ability to exercise their treaty rights. So there's been a growing recognition within this region that climate is the issue that kind of transcends boundaries and is becoming a major focus for many of us. Each sanctuary goes through something called the production of a condition report, which summarizes our understanding of the scientific information affecting kind of the health and well-being of a number of different resources. And it's kind of a standardized way of assessing ecosystem health. And so each sanctuary produces a condition report episodically to understand kind of what are the stressors facing the area and how can we best focus kind of our work. So we are in the process of completing our condition report for Olympic Coast, and both climate and ocean acidification were major issues that were identified as affecting the health and well-being of this particular sanctuary, which is pretty remote and does not have a lot of population base on it. So when people look at the area, they often think everything looks great. But when you dive a little bit deeper, you realize there are a lot of factors going on. So what we want to do is be able to leverage the information that has been generated through this condition report into really creating some outcome-based climate change planning that we can then integrate into our strategic plan, which will guide our actions for the next 5 to 10 years, and hopefully also inspire action by our partners. As Lauren mentioned, part of this is really to begin to evaluate and test a range of adaptation and mitigation strategies. And in particular with Olympic Coast, this is a fairly new area for us, but we want to be really well focused in making sure that the strategies that we're putting in place have the best chance for success, are appropriately focused, and that we have the capacity to implement it. So if you go to the next one. So just a little bit on the context, a condition report really assesses the current condition of sanctuary resources by looking back, and it asks to create a status that looks at kind of the conditions and the trend up to that point. So it's more retrospective. The next step that we're adding that Lauren mentioned earlier was the conducting of a vulnerability assessment. And this will really allow us to think about what the future conditions of resources might be by taking the current condition and adding the projected climate impacts to create what the trajectory might be going forward. And by combining those two, we feel that it will give us kind of the most robust climate-informed actions that we could take. We have not typically done these vulnerability assessments, so it's a new process within the sanctuary program. There have been a number of them conducted, but taking the sequence of doing a condition report, then adding in the vulnerability assessment, which then helps inform your future strategies, is fairly new. So we're basically testing that at Olympic Coast. So the steps we'll take is to complete the condition report. We also had done a very comprehensive climate assessment in 2013, but we realized that things were changing so rapidly that we really needed to update that report. So we're in the process of that right now. because issues like marine heat waves, rate of ocean acidification, number of hypoxia and harmful algal bloom events are actually accelerating over what we had observed in 2013. So we feel that it's important to have that updated look at climate impacts on this particular sanctuary. The next step would then be to complete this vulnerability assessment leading into the management plan, and then to really kind of also identify what we don't know and begin to kind of fill some of those gaps, and then also look at how do we do kind of an interim review of the effectiveness of both the vulnerability assessment, mitigation strategies, et cetera. So it's kind of a never-ending loop that you do because you never get to the answer, but hopefully you get to a better climate-informed management strategy for a particular area. So next one. So just a little bit on vulnerability assessments. It really is this characterization of both climate stressors, things like temperature change, marine heat waves, ocean acidification, hypoxia, habitat compression, harmful algal blooms, and precipitation changes. Added on, what are some of the non-climate stressors for our area? Those are things like vessel traffic patterns, potential for oil spills, acoustics in the ocean, marine debris. So you kind of combine those two together because they are what are the stressors on the environment. And then we also look at how is that playing out for individual species, habitats, and affecting things like ecosystem services. So it's kind of this holistic look. And then out of that helps you to prioritize what adaptation and mitigation strategies you would like to enact. So it's a pretty robust system, and we'll be testing out how well this works in our particular area. There are information gaps, but I also feel like we can't wait to have all the information in order to move forward with some of these adaptation and mitigation strategies, because as I mentioned, the rate of change is just really accelerating in many of these areas. So next one. So as I mentioned, each sanctuary has an advisory council that is composed of the different interest groups, and we have convened a working group this last May to begin working on this. We should have our updated climate information report done by September of 2021, and then we'll begin the vulnerability assessment in this fall and winter, and then look to create a summary of potential actions that could be undertaken in spring of 2022, and then we'll be folding that into an update to our management plan. That process will start in fall of 2022. So hopefully by next year, we'll actually have a very action-oriented strategy for climate change in Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary.
Okay, thanks, Carol. And just reminding folks that if you have questions, you can put those in the question box, and Carol and I will be available to answer them at the end. But I just wanted to add a couple of other partnership activities that we have going on with climate. And to acknowledge that this is an area where we really need to learn a lot about how climate is affecting our sanctuaries, what that means for the living marine resources, what kinds of management actions can help improve conditions in the sanctuaries. And we work with a lot of partners across NOAA, science partners like NCAS and IUS, and more recently, a growing partnership with the Climate Program Office. And to their credit, they reached out to us a couple of years ago to learn more about what our needs were in terms of climate science, and heard a lot from our superintendents and others about all the kinds of information that we needed to better understand how some of these broad scale predictions might manifest themselves in these specific places where we have management responsibilities. And as a result of that, the Climate Program Office's Marine Ecosystem Risk Team developed a Science for Sanctuaries initiative And we've really had a great partnership over the past 18 months or so. And the focus has been on identifying sanctuaries' climate research and information needs, looking at opportunities to work together on communication and education through videos and other tools to communicate the role of climate in sanctuaries management, the development of monitoring and indicators, and to connect those with the National Climate Assessment, and support for a visiting climate scientist, a position that's shared between the two offices that has really served as a critical link between the two offices to really understand the activities of each office, the priorities, and really facilitate that practical partnership. And so one of the major successes of this partnership to date has been a climate science priorities workshop that was held in January of this year. And it grew out of a series of regional focus groups that had been held last year to start understanding the issues at the regional scale. And then those were rolled up into a national workshop that included not only sanctuaries managers and staff, but a lot of scientists from the Office of Research, from not only the Climate Office, but some of the labs, NOAA Fisheries, and a number of other NOAA offices. And so we had 130 participants from across several LOs, 38 breakout sessions, really very robust discussion across a wide range of issues, both in terms of regional perspectives and thematic discussions, and generated this workshop report, which was just published internally last month and will be published publicly very, very soon, I believe either this month or early next month. And it includes the cross-cutting needs of the program, recommended actions, and a preliminary list of climate indicators. So this is a great start in terms of a foundation for future focus on climate science in the sanctuaries. And then we've also been working with the Climate Program Office internationally. The State Department reached out to us because they were interested in supporting work to integrate blue carbon or coastal wetlands into countries' greenhouse gas inventories. And so they funded a project to work on this, and it's going to be providing tools, approaches, and capacity to integrate coastal blue carbon, that's typically mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses, into national greenhouse gas inventories. And what countries do is they prepare these inventories in order to inform what they call their nationally determined contributions, or their contributions to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions to meet the Paris Agreement commitments. So this is very linked to international commitments and domestic planning, and really trying to make sure that coastal ecosystems are part of that process, and recognizing that they provide multiple benefits, not only climate benefits, but also, as we know, a host of coastal protection, biodiversity, water quality benefits. And so our role within the Sanctuaries Office is going to be to help integrate the broader carbon accounting process into the coastal management and marine management capabilities that these countries have. So we are now working with the Climate Program Office and others, including the USAID and the Forest Service, EPA, and the Smithsonian, to identify which countries we can work with. Some will be one-on-one and some will be on a regional basis to help meet these goals over the next 3 years. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on one other recent international initiative, and this came out of the 2019 Climate Conference of the Parties, which was originally supposed to be held in Chile and then had to be moved to Madrid. But Chile's vision for this climate meeting was that it be a blue COP, meaning that oceans would be front and center in the discussions about climate. And I'm sure many of you have heard this increasing awareness of how oceans have to be a central part of the solution to our climate discussions. And that's been elevated in some of these international treaties and discussions. And so Sanctuaries was invited to be a participant in a side event at the COP in Madrid. And Maria Brown, who's the manager of the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, represented the office and came and shared a lot of her experience in assessing and planning for climate and starting to identify adaptation actions at that sanctuary. And out of that side event grew an international partnership on MPAs, biodiversity, and climate change, made up of 5 founding member countries: Chile, the UK, the United States, France, and Costa Rica. And the idea is to ensure that decision makers understand the connections between marine protected areas as nature-based solutions for biodiversity conservation and climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. It's really to raise the profile of oceans broadly and marine protected areas specifically within the climate dialogue. So we are really excited about this. This was just launched last month, and we will be looking to develop some products that can be shared at the next Climate Conference of the Parties, which will be in November of this year, held in Glasgow. So lastly, this slide was originally developed for sanctuary staff, but we thought it was relevant to all folks who work across NOAA and in outside organizations, just thinking about, how others can get more involved or engaged in climate issues, getting educated about the climate impacts and predictions are for your region, and then identifying opportunities to integrate climate into your work. So that's what we're encouraging our team to do. And we have really been excited about the interest in this work, and also the opportunities to build climate into our existing and our new partnerships. And so lastly, I just wanted to thank the ONMS Climate Tiger team that developed this plan. In addition to Carol and me, it was Maria Brown, Tuatasi Lele Peao, and Stan Rogers, and Zach Canizzo, our climate coordinator, and Sarah Hutto from the Greater Farallones also played a critical role in contributing to the plan. So I want to thank them as well. So I'm going to stop here, and Carol and I are available to answer questions.
Thanks, Lauren. It looks like we do have a question. Our first question is, are you considering adding more large sanctuaries, i.e. 30% by 2030, as one of your strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, the 30 by 30 effort that the Biden administration has launched is part of a climate solution. It was part of the climate executive order. So they definitely see the connections between conservation and climate resilience. I think the focus under 30 by 30 is really to be more locally led. So we're going to be working with groups across the country to identify ways to have conservation efforts across a wide scale to meet a variety of needs. So some of them will be about access to nature, making sure that underprivileged or folks who have lacked access to natural areas are able to get that, as well as the other kinds of benefits that conservation areas provide. So I think there are a lot of different options on the table. I think that may be one, but it's certainly not going to be the main focus, which is going to be to have more of a locally led process.
Lauren, we might mention though also that there is, and there has been for the last, 10 years, 5 years, a process to consider the addition of new sanctuaries into the system. And that was actually a nomination process by local communities with some guidelines on what would constitute the criteria for being considered as a sanctuary. So we actually have a number of sites that are currently under consideration, which would help expand. They weren't necessarily nominated based on their climate change resilience, but I think will certainly be a factor as we make deliberations on those potential candidate sites moving forward.
Yeah, great point, Carol. And just building on what you said, I think one aspect of this plan is to kind of bring that climate lens to actions that are going forward, like when looking at the candidate sites, making sure that we take into consideration climate factors. Are there any other
All right.
questions?
I don't have any, but I'm gonna wait a minute in case anyone is typing and see if anything comes through here. If you have any questions, those can go in the panel. That should be on your GoToWebinar panel. All right, and I think that that's going to be it for today then. Thank you to, oh, wait, we have one more here. One sec. Let me pull that up. Okay, I have a question that I will forward to, more of a comment. I'll forward that to you after the presentation at the end here. So that is all of the questions. Thank you to Lauren and Carol. Thank you all for joining us. You'll be able to find this presentation on YouTube later this afternoon. When the presentation ends, you'll see a survey. If you could take time to fill this out, we do use these surveys to improve marketing our library seminar service and to inform future seminar topics. Thank you again for joining us. Have a safe and enjoyable rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks, Carol.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.